So, no, I wouldn't say I have a passion for HR.
Welcome back to Human Resources for the People. It's a human capital revolution. Today we're going to be talking about firing someone in China. This is part of a long series that I do about comparative human resources throughout the world. And this article is from Morgan, Lewis, and Bockius. They're an employment law firm that operate in China. Take a look down below. You can read the link if you'd like to know more. I think this is really interesting because obviously China is a communist country. It's an interesting country, and I'd like to compare it to other communist countries as well as other Asian countries. So we'll do my best and sort of search some memory banks as well as compare with the United States, of course. So there are exceptions to termination with cause. So generally, employers have to terminate for cause, and that's basically the case in the United States. Now, generally, in reality, you can terminate someone for whatever reason in the United States, but to avoid discrimination complaints, to avoid the perception of favoritism and so forth, generally American employers don't really. I mean, it happens, it absolutely does, but it is fairly rare. And so I think that that's pretty interesting. You do have to give a notice, but you can pay out. An employer may dismiss an employee with 30 days of prior notice after the completion of medical treatment, or if the employee is incompetent at their job after training, or there's material changes to the objective circumstances that make the employment contract no longer executable. Which I assume that means that, for example, they're shutting down a building or shutting down a store or something of that nature. They can obviously end the contract. I'm kind of surprised. So, for example, there are Venezuela, which is obviously also a communist country. You can't do that. You go before a labor board, and it becomes arduous. And so, but you can terminate without notice, and it's actually not that difficult, relatively speaking. You can do it if you fail to meet the conditions set out by the probationary period, severely violate the employer's internal rules and policies, is corrupt or neglectful in performing their duties, lied on their application, convicted of a crime, simultaneously employed by another employer. All of these things are things that you can be fired in the United States for. And, I mean, in fact, what's interesting is in communist China, you can be fired immediately if you're convicted of a crime. That, in many states and in many localities, could be illegal depending on what the crime is and so forth. And I think that's interesting. Yeah, depending on it's considered discriminatory depending on the state and the municipality. But I think that that's really interesting. So they do a severance pay upon termination of employment, and you have to make one as long as you don't renew the fixed term labor contract, the employer initiates the termination discussion, etc. So there's quite a bit of situations where the employer must make severance payments upon termination of the contract. That's not common in the United States. It is very common throughout the rest of the world. I mean, I would say it's mostly standard if I had to give a description. Um, the aggregate amount of severance payment is calculated based on the monthly salary multiplied by the year of service, and they have to if the monthly salary of an employee is higher than 3 times the average monthly salary for the relevant year, as announced by the government at the municipal level, directly under the central government, then they make different calculations. Severance payments are not required in the United States at all. There is a way to fire an employee if it has to provide prior notice to the trade union. That's almost ubiquitous throughout the world that the trade union needs to be notified. That's common in Europe. That's common everywhere I can think of. That's fairly normal. Um, in addition, the local or municipal union may be notified. That's also fairly normal, as well as the local federal government. Now, I think we'll be talking about that a little bit later. You don't even need a government approval to terminate an employee's contract, but that is required in Venezuela. So interesting. I think that we often think of China as this communist country that has strict rules with respect to employment, but in reality, I'm not really seeing it, to be totally honest. This is not particularly employee friendly compared to the rest of the world. It is employee friendly compared to the United States, right? Barely though. I would say barely, but it is. And so there are employees that are protected from dismissal, specifically employees, and a lot of these are specifically COVID related, but or seem to be COVID related, but and they're mostly medical related. You can't, for example, employees who have worked for 15 consecutive years with the same employer and are within 5 years of retirement age are protected. Um, and employees otherwise protected by relevant laws, as well as employees who are pregnant or on maternity leave, which is the period from childbirth until the child's first birthday. The United States has that, but it's bigger, right? It's bigger than pregnant, right? You're protected from dismissal, depending, but if you get sick, if you have an injury, if you have something else, um, it doesn't really cover for that, as far as I can tell. Uh, I think that's pretty interesting. In addition, if an employer intends to dismiss 20 or more employees, then or fewer than 20 when it's 10% or more of its total, then have to be statutory reasons, including restructuring. And so it becomes a little bit more difficult. And the employer should consider the opinions of the union and employees and file the mass layoff plan with the labor administrative authorities. Well, that is, roughly, there are rules surrounding this, but that is roughly required in the United States. It's not, and it says here, government approval is not legally required to implement a mass layoff. Isn't legally required in the United States either, but you do have to file a Warden Act notice once it becomes a certain percentage. So, this is very similar here. Again, there is a mandatory retirement age, and this would be considered discriminatory in the United States, but there is a mandatory retirement age of 60 for male workers and 55 for female workers who hold desk jobs or positions not requiring manual labor, and 50 for positions that do. And originally it applied for only employees of state-owned businesses, which I find to be extremely interesting because again, there was private practice at this time, and it actually didn't apply to them, but a long time ago. But now it does. And then there are early retirements for physical workers. Again, employees who work underground at high altitudes or in extreme temperatures, or whose work is physically taxing, gets retirement at 55 for male workers and 45 for female workers. And you know what? That is again considered discriminatory. I don't know what the payments for these retirement ages, but you do have employers can impose mandatory retirement ages. And yes, that's considered discriminatory in the United States. We cannot do that, of course. And I find that to be extremely interesting. Well, that's it. I mean, considering all this, is the United States government more protective of its workers than China? It seems like it would. Have the communists won? Let me know. Leave a comment down below because this is truly interesting to me and honestly a bit stunning. I had not reviewed China's labor laws before, but it seems to be a little bit more pro-business than the United States. Let me know in the comments down below. Have a great day. Bye, guys.